This all started when this video popped up in my recommended. It was a simple video about rigid bodies and how they work in Blender, and me being interested in this topic decided to give this video a watch. After watching the video, I decided to do something using rigid bodies and what I had learned from the video. As a rigid body is really interesting, it can be added with like 2 clicks and it adds entire physics to your object, which can change the way a render looks completely. So I decided to use rigid bodies as a base to make my first ever proper render. To make this render, I decided to go in with a clear idea of what I was going to do. So I opened up Paint and started brainstorming for some ideas. After about half an hour of brainstorming, I finally settled on this one idea where a ball is placed on a slope, and once it slides down this slope, it knocks down a bunch of dominoes which knock down another ball, and it falls on another slope, and it basically just gets looped. To start working on the render, I decided to split my work in 2 parts. To first learn how to make the dominoes work and then learn how to make the ball slide down the slope. Now that I had my idea ready, I had to start implementing it. So I opened up Blender, made a new project, and decided to figure out how these simulations work. So I've been doing this for the past half an hour and I've done nothing but this. Yeah, so this was a lot harder than expected, and finally, after about an hour or so, I was able to make a domino sequence. Now that I got the dominoes to work, I had to learn how to make the ball slide through the ramp. So I started this by making a new project and made a low poly ramp and made it a passive rigid body. Added a sphere, gave it an active rigid body. Immediately I messed up and placed the ball too close to the ramp. So I decided to move it to the right a little bit and thought it would work. Well, it didn't. One of the main issues that I had was that the ball didn't recognize the curves on the plane and treated it as if it was just a normal plane that was slanting. Little did I know this could be fixed with like 2 clicks, but I instead spent like half an hour changing every single property that I could. I mean, I got it to work in the end, but yeah, it could have been avoided with a little brain usage. Another issue that I faced was the ball just randomly jumped at the start. Luckily, I was able to find a solution for this on the Blender Stack Exchange forum. I added a few textures and lights and stuff to this project and I exported it. It was a pretty cool render. Now that I knew exactly how to make the render, it was time to actually make it. So I made a new project and decided to first start working on the background. I added a few lights and stuff, and eventually I decided to remove these lights and add them back later towards the end. And so I started working on the ramp. Initially, I thought I'd make this ramp by simply loop cutting a plane and making them curve by just moving it. But later I discovered a much more efficient method by making like staircase-like structures and just beveling it into curves. So I did this and was able to make a proper ramp. I gave it a metallic texture, and now I started working on the table that the dominoes would be placed on. So making the table was really easy. I just made it by resizing a cube and I gave it like a black texture. I did the same process of making the table, but I did it in a smaller scale and made dominoes which I placed on the table. Now all I needed to do was to make the rigid bodies work and the whole render would be done. So I slowly made everything into either an active or a passive rigid body and added a UV sphere for the ball, and now if I click the play button, everything should hopefully work. And guess what? It didn't work at all.
Mission failed. We'll get them next time.
I was straight up raging at this point. After I calmed down, I came back to the project and I changed a lot of the settings and finally got it to work. But this time there was another problem. My C drive has been running out of space lately, and save files for this project was saved in, guess what, my C drive. And so the files didn't get saved basically. The one time I get it right, it doesn't save. Since I just fixed my render, I kind of knew which settings to tweak in order to fix it. So I spent like another half an hour like tweaking the settings again, and I was able to get it to work. This time I decided to add like few lights and stuff, and while I was trying to add this stuff, I somehow messed up the render. but I was able to save it because the second I got the render to work, I had saved the project. And now I had an idea. If I didn't save the project now, it would revert back to the last saved one. And the last saved one was the one where the render worked. So even though I had this great idea, I could not check if it worked because I had exams for like 1 month straight and I had zero time to check if it worked or not. So the second my exams got over and I had somewhat of a break, I opened Blender and yes, it worked. My Giga Brain strategy had worked. And now that I had a working render and some free time, it was time to finish the render once and for all. Now that I had just come back to the project, I decided to see if there was anything wrong with the render. And it all seems fine until this. To try and fix this issue, I tried changing the position of the last domino, the one that was bugging out, a little bit higher on the x-axis to see if it works. And I don't even know what this is. Now I had another problem to fix, so I made every part of the scene into either an active or a passive rigid body to see if it would help. Well, it didn't. So I just deleted the entire thing and it still didn't work. But while deleting it, I got to know that it wasn't an issue with that one piece, it was an issue with the entire render. And I don't know why, but whatever the last piece was, it kept falling through. So I decided to use this to my advantage and place the ball, which was anyway going to be placed somewhere in the near future, so that the render would loop. So I placed the ball where the last domino was, and this caused the dominoes to hit the ball and the ball move forward, which was anyway what I wanted. So yeah, that works. Once I got this to work, I decided to call it a day and just alt tabbed and started doing other stuff. But when I tapped back in, this was what I saw. Thankfully, it was not a problem with the render, it was just some problem with the edit mode part of the render, and once I came out of edit mode, it was working. So that was that. Now it was time to add a few final touches to the render. So to start off, I decreased the size of the ball so that it matches the size of the original ball so that it will loop better. Then I decided to add textures to every part of the scene. I just decided to use basic textures and I just gave every part of it the render texture, added a few lights on the edges, and I couldn't really get a good texture for the ball, so I decided to give it a glowing red texture, which would be nice in the final render as it would emit light on the full scene, is what I thought. Now it was time to learn how to adjust the cameras in such a way that the render actually looped. This was going to be the hardest part of the render since I had done nothing, like absolutely nothing using cameras till now. To fix the cameras for this render, I had to learn two things. One, how to keyframe the camera into different positions, and two, how to make the view I am seeing right now into what my camera sees. This can actually be easily done by just clicking Ctrl Alt and numpad 0. The keyframing part was pretty easy as well since I had like experience with keyframes in 2D animation. After I finished setting up the camera, all I had to do was click the export button. And after waiting for a long time, this was the final render.